Sometimes during the day I see a great landscape that I want to sketch. It could be out a hotel window or even just looking out the window at my office or when I'm going about my day. So in this lesson, I'll show you how to sketch landscapes without a lot of fuss. I'll show you my approach called sky, ground, and middle. You'll be able to sketch these landscapes without worrying about complex things like a lot of perspective. My approach is really to focus on big sweeping lines and concentrate on shapes. So this is a sketch that I did at Big Sur in California, and as you can see, really focused on the big shapes of the mountains and the sea, and very, very simple color and just not a lot of fuss around detail. Here's another sketch I did, and this is a place called Baylands in Palo Alto, California, near where I live. And in this sketch, I was able to do very, very simple thumbnails of the landscape, and very quickly, pretty much less than 5 minutes each, concentrating on the water, some of the trees in the background, and some of the big shapes again for the landscape elements that I saw there. So landscapes are kind of like a sandwich. There's the sky, the ground, and the middle. So let's see how that approach will work in the location that I'm in. So I'm here at a lake, and I see some great trees behind me. There's a lot of sky here, so you see that there's a nice big expanse of sky. There's ground, which in this case is water, which is the lake, and this great sort of middle ground, which is trees. So that's what I'm going to start with as I go through my sketch. You'll see that I actually have put a boundary line on my paper already for where I'm going to sketch. And my setup is pretty simple. I have my palette of watercolors, a pen, and actually we'll show you how to use a brush along with a water brush in this sketch, which can make it easier, especially when you're drawing a lot of trees or something that requires a lot of big shapes of color. So I've also got my water brush in my binder clip here, which is a very handy way to keep everything together. So I'm going to get started. First off, I'm going to look at my sky. I really like the sky and the shapes, the clouds that I'm seeing, so I'm actually going to make that a big part of my sketch. I'm going to put the water line right around here. I'm going to really focus on the sky, so I'm making the sky fairly large. I'm going to start putting my tree line in, which will define the sky. And the trees that I'm seeing here, you see kind of a nice big shape to start off with, so I'm going to actually focus on making that the focal point of my middle, right? So again, that defines the sky. And notice that I'm putting it a little off center. It's always nice not to have it right smack in the middle. So all my lines, sort of my water line, my tree lines, everything's going to be a little bit off center. And I'm going to make that kind of the biggest shape. Then I'm going to put in just the lines that I see next to it for the other trees. There's kind of a row of trees in this landscape, and I'll break it up a little bit, put in just a little bit of where some of my trunks might go as well. There's some grass that I see right below it, so I want to leave a little bit of space for the ground for the grass. Continuing to define my sky, there's some branches over there and a little bit more just squiggly lines to define my sky. And so that's pretty much where my sky will be focused. And I've given myself a nice big area for the sky so that I can later put in some nice colors and define the clouds. So this is a sketch that I did in Arizona, and as you'll see, I really focused on the sky here and gave it a lot of space. So I was really hoping to get a nice quality of distance in this sketch and got a lot of cloud shapes in to really define what was going on in that sort of twilight sky where I was drawing this. So I'll continue here by putting in my ground, which in this case, of course, is the water line. So I'm going to put the water line in. So what I'm seeing is a pretty flat water situation here. So I'm just going to drag my line across. I'm going to do most of this probably with my color. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit of hint of where that water line is going to be. And that's going to be pretty much my my ground. If I were doing something that had a little more of dirt or ground, or maybe even grass in the foreground, in this case my grass is sort of in the middle, I might actually even not put some lines in, right? Because grass could really be defined by color. But in this case, because I do want my water line to be parallel to the bottom of my box, I am going to put it in so that I know where I'm putting in the color. So in this sketch, you'll see that I chose to make the ground my focus because I was really looking to get the sense of the dunes of sand here in Indiana where I was sketching. So you'll see that I put more detail into the ground with some grasses coming out of the sand and really the broad sweeping strokes of watercolor to define that sand. So now for our middle, I'm going to put in these really nice tufts of grass that I see on the banks of this lake. So I'm going to put it in with really quick strokes. Again, just gestural, not really worrying about where they go, but it's adding a little bit of interest. I'll kind of make sure I put in a little more, again, very quickly, of the tree branches. There's some trees there. And put in a little bit of the bottoms of the trees again. So this sort of constitutes my middle, right? Because I see this line at the bottom where the tree branches end. And again, very quickly, just putting that in and defining a couple of the trees just to give it some balance. Really quick, and generally just getting a sense of tree shapes here to make up my scene. So that'll be just about enough material there. Might give myself a little bit of information that there's some shadow shapes going on here as these dunes sort of are in shadow. My tree as well. I'll do this more in color, but I'll give myself a little bit of indication that there are some shadow shapes. And then I'll be just about ready to put in some color. So this is a sketch I did in Brazil at the beach. And you'll see that actually it's a great example of having the three different sections, sky, ground, and middle. And here I really focused a lot on this middle, and that was the mountains. So the beach was really kind of the ground here and the water, and we had sky in the back, but really the mountains were the middle, and that's what I wanted to make sure to put in there to set off the sweep of the beach that I was drawing. So if I had just 5 minutes here, this is about what I would do. I might just add a little bit of more shadow as I was doing earlier with a heavier pen. But right now I actually have a little more time, so I'm gonna go ahead and add some color. I'm gonna go to my water brush and start in with the sky. What I see in the sky, it's very beautiful. I'm seeing lots of great cloud shapes, but I'm also seeing a gradient in the sky. So it's really kind of darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. And you'll actually find, if you observe the sky in general, that's often the case, right? It's much darker at the top, and as it kind of goes toward your eye level or horizon line, it'll get a little lighter. So I'm gonna actually start very dark with my blue at the top and kind of leave some space in for the clouds as I go down. So I'm gonna start pretty dark and start right in at the top. And what I might do sometimes is actually test out my color on part of the page here. And just make sure that my water brush is watering it down enough for the sky. This sky in particular I see is fairly light even at the top, so I'm gonna water it down a little bit and then come right in so that it's not too dark. The water brush is gonna keep adding water as I continue to sweep in so that I don't have to actually add any white or anything. The water will lighten it for me. And I'm gonna keep a little bit of these white cloud shapes, which I like here, and I'll continue to go down to my tree line. And another thing I'm doing is making the cloud shapes smaller as I go down. So that's another quick trick, is that when you're higher in the sky, the cloud shapes tend to be a little bigger, and when I'm lower in the sky, they tend to be smaller and closer together. So just to give a sense of depth in the sky. All right, so I'm gonna add a little bit of color in there because skies are generally not completely blue. So I'll wipe off my brush and go into my red a little bit, just warming up, maybe a yellow, just warming it up a little bit in the base here. And so I'm just kind of dotting this at the base of these clouds, giving it a little shadow. If you look at clouds, there's often a little bit of shadow shape, especially kind of on the bottom. So really quickly warming that up, and you'll see that gives it nice depth, and it's no longer sort of a flat cloud. So I'm really liking how that looks. Okay, perfect. So I think that's pretty much what I'll do for my sky. What I'll do next is actually do the sweep of the lake, which I think is a nice flat shape here to get my, kind of define my middle. So for this lake, which I see a lot of reflection of what the tree line is, I'm really going to go into my greens and browns, get a nice deep color going there. And I want to get it really nice and puddly. And something that I do often when I'm out and about, if I don't want to carry water, right, I just have a water brush, I'll sometimes actually carry this chopped off regular brush, because I can actually use the puddle that I've made with my water brush here to get a little bit of a nice flat stroke, which is nice for something like a lake. So the water brush doesn't give me quite as much control. And here I'm actually going a little bit outside the lines as well, just to give myself a little bit of room, and that's okay. Leaving some white because there's a lot of reflection in that lake, and just putting those in very, very carefully there. Just putting those in right at the edge there to define the middle, and a little bit of dark there. Not too much, just enough to say that that is a little bit of the lake line, the reflection, etc. So that's about what I might do there. Right, now I'll go into the trees. So the trees are really a nice bright color with some shadow shapes. So I'll go in now, put this brush back into my little binder clip hole there, go back to my water brush, and I have some green that I had from before, so I'll kind of use that. If I am going to use a color that I had mixed earlier, I don't bother cleaning it up, and I'll just go right into colors and sort of add to or modify the color. That's the nice thing about having these watercolors. They dry obviously really quickly, so I can keep those mixed colors around. And I'm going to start by just, again, putting in those light colored shapes. I'll go back and add shadows later. I'm going in with the lights, really kind of making sure that I cover most of my trees. I'm leaving white space, always leaving white space, just to give it highlight and sparkle, and kind of going through and defining my trees there. Now the grass and the parts below are slightly different, and I want to get a little bit of that color that I was using for the lake to define that, and even going a little bit even darker. So I might start kind of putting in some of those darker shapes there and seeing how I like that. I might vary my green yet again, adding a little bit more dark colors. And this is something that you can really play with. Just think about all the different variations you can get of a green by just adding in different tones as you go. So here I might add maybe even more of my straight sap green, and really kind of, I like that. So really kind of going in between some of those darks there. Again, still leaving some white space to define that as a different texture there. All right, so now to go back and put some shadow shapes into the trees, I'm going to mix up my darker color yet again. Maybe this time I'll put in a little bit of blue, maybe some other colors. Doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of creating a nice dark. What I'm really concentrating on is not so much matching the colors as making sure that it is a believable dark for my trees. So going back in, and most of the shadows I'm seeing are kind of on the left side. So I'll sort of just dab in some shadows on the bottom and left side because the sun's sort of coming from the right there. And that'll give it a little bit of definition. So notice that I'm just loosely following the marks that I had made to give it some definition. Keeping my brush, if it gets dry, just squeeze out a little more water there and put in a little more paint. You can always wipe it against the side if it gets too wet there. But making sure that it's wet enough that it's not kind of leaving harsh shapes, and just really loose there. And that gives me a nice definition there. If it's getting a little bit too monotonous, you can always just give it a little more definition even at the top, because you look at trees and sometimes there's little branches up at the top which also have some shadow sides there, so you can put that in. And there you have it, a very quick landscape sketch with sky, ground, and middle clearly defined. So we've used watercolor quite a bit in this class already, but in the next lesson, I'll show you some color mixes and interesting techniques to really make your sketches sing.